Hi, we're Ariel.
And Michelle,
And
and
we're
we're
the
the
Board
board
Game
game
Tutors.
tutors.
Today we're going to be doing advanced concepts for the board game Rise of Augustus, specifically going over special powers and a few loose ends that we didn't cover in previous videos. Let's go ahead and get started.
All right. So here you can see we have the board mostly set up still.
Michelle's side isn't set up that much, but you'll see why in a minute. But okay, so let's go over those two loose ends that I was talking about. Michelle, why don't you start off?
Okay, so first we just wanted to talk about what happens if you run out of legionnaires in your pool. So you normally will have 7 in your pool, and there are ways you can add or lose ones over the course of the game. So if you have all 7 out on your objectives, like we do here in this example, then when a token is pulled from the bag, when the town crier calls out the next symbol,
Shield.
Yes, so there's a shield. So you might think that you can't cover a shield because you don't have any legionnaires left in your pool. But you are allowed to transfer a legionnaire from another spot, from another space. So in this case, for example, since Ariel just called shield, you can see we just have a shield left to complete that objective on the left. And so we probably want to be able to complete that objective. So we can look elsewhere and take a legionnaire from any other spot in order to put it on that shield. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. It can come from any other space. It just has to go on a shield space because that's the one that was just called. So Ariel's going to move that token onto the shield. And now we've completed that objective.
And also one other thing that you should know, whenever you draw a mobilization token out of the bag, you don't replace it after drawing it. The only time you replace it is once someone has completed an objective. So all the mobilization tokens come out onto the table one at a time, and they don't go back into the bag after each draw.
Right. They go back in when play passes to the next town crier, and that happens as soon as someone fulfills an objective.
Right. So obviously in this case, I would have completed that objective. That's a particular senator, and then the town crier position would pass on to the next player, which would be Michelle. Okay, so that's the first loose end that we wanted to tie up. And the second one, let me put this back into the bag. So what happens in the situation where 2 players or more players complete objectives at the same time? So let's just say, here, let's do this. Let's just pretend obviously I'm just going to keep the cards where they are right now, just so it's not too complicated. But let's say Michelle, let's see here, I'm going to borrow one of hers because I ran out. Let's say Michelle and I both completed, Michelle completed this one on her side of the board, her personal area, and I completed this guy on my side of the board. So, and we completed them at the same time. Let's just say here, the last town crier called out shield. It doesn't matter who the town crier was in that particular time, but we put a shield there, and I put a shield there. So Michelle got one, and I got one. And so we both finished at the same time. So, and this applies to other examples where 3 people, 4 people, or more complete an objective simultaneously. With the same call out of the same town crier. We would both finish these objectives, obviously. They would go to our completed section. And so this is how it would work. So remember how I told you before under card anatomy, each card has a number going all the way up to 88. Michelle would look at hers. She calls out she has an 8. I look at mine. I have a 67. And so as a result, Michelle would go first. So she would complete all of her steps first. So how would that go? We'll back up here. She would remove all of her soldiers and put them in her her pile of legionnaires. Then she would look here and look at her special powers on the top right corner. We're not going to explain this right now, but it's actually not one that applies right now at this particular time. But she would do her special power at this point if she had one that worked at this immediate time. Next, she would take that card. Obviously, I'm being a little loose here. Her card wouldn't normally be in front of me, but I'm going to take her card and place it in her controlled area. That's step 3. Then step 4, she would look at all of her controlled objectives and see if any of those meet the requirements for any of the reward tiles up here. Now, we're not explaining that right now, but if she qualified for any one of those at that particular time, she has the option of taking that reward tile. So that's what would happen on step 4. Lastly, step 5, she now has one empty space in her working area. So she would take one of these 5, grab it, and put it in her working area. So let's just say she grabbed this one and replaced that into her working area. Obviously, the spacing here isn't working out perfectly, but let's just pretend that's her working area.
So I would add that to the 3 objectives that I'm now currently working on.
And lastly, as part of step 5, you would take one of the objectives from the top of the draw pile and replace the one that you just drew. So that would be Michelle's turn, because she was first, obviously. Next, I would go. I would collect all my soldiers, put them back into my pile. Look here, see the special power. It's not an immediate special power, so I'm not going to make use of that right now. Then I would take that, put it into my controlled area, look at all my controlled objectives, see if I qualify for any of the reward tiles up there. Then I would grab one of these cards. Let's just say I grab this one. I'm not really thinking about this sort of thing, but let's see here. It's fighting me. One sec. There we go. Grab that card, put it into my working area, and then replace from there, just like I did before. So everybody who qualified for the simultaneous completed objectives, the order would be determined by the number on the card, and then they would all fulfill those steps, 1 through 5. Okay, so those are the 2 loose ends that we wanted to make sure got covered in this video, because we forgot to cover those in the previous videos. So let's go ahead and move on to now special powers, like we said before. So let me just clean up my space around here.
So we're going to go over all of the different special powers that there can be on the objective cards. We're not going to go through the whole deck of objective cards, but we're going to give you an example of each kind of special power that there is.
Right. Okay. Let me just get these guys out of the way. Let's just put them in the discard for now, because we don't need them. Alrighty. So here's the first example of quote-unquote special powers, and here we are.
So you can see with these objectives, they actually have no special power. If you look in the top right-hand corner, there's no rectangle there telling you what their special power is. But they do have a lot of victory points. So they're on the left. You can see that one gives you 16 victory points. And the senator on the right gives you 15 victory points. So you can kind of see the trade-off with these examples, that they don't have a special power, but they have a lot of points for the end of the game.
And they're also rather difficult to fulfill, because they need 6 spaces to be filled in. And obviously, that's dedicating a lot of your legionnaires to one thing, and also you're depending upon the random draw out of the bag.
Right.
So these are semi-difficult to complete, but well worth it in terms of victory points, but you're just not sure how long you'll have to work at them before they're completed.
Right.
So, like we said, these have no special powers. So these are just an example of a province and a senator without special powers. Right, let's get that out of the way. Next one. All right, all of these, they're rather straightforward special powers. So right here, once you complete this objective and you fill in all these spaces, all the types of cards in this particular stack let you grab 2 soldiers off of this card. So obviously the normal way of this working would be you would have 4 soldiers, 1, 2.
Right. In order to complete the objective, you would have placed 4 legionnaires on this card.
So if we completed this objective, you would take these 4 soldiers, remove them, but then you go here to the power, and you can see here this card gives you the special power of immediately placing 2 of your legionnaires onto double sword spaces on other objectives you are currently working on. So, for example, let's just say, let's use the cards in from before. If I completed this objective, I would remove the 4 soldiers, and I would immediately use the power. So I can put 2 soldiers on 2 double swords. So if you look here, if these were the 3 cards that I was working on in my working area, I could take 2 of my legionnaires that I just finished with, and I could put them over here, because there are 2 double swords right there. So using this card, I call it like the immediate transfer of legionnaires. It's not a very pretty name, but you can immediately move legionnaires to the specified symbol. So,
yeah, and you can see that there.
Yeah, the two double sword, a double sword, a double sword. So you can move one soldier there and one soldier there. If you don't have the capability, let's say, for example, one of those is already taken, all you can do is one, because obviously you have no other double swords. So you can move one, even though that one says two.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do one or two, or none, if you can't do anything.
Right.
But obviously the maximum use of this card would be to make use of that ability. So that's how that works. So all the cards in this particular stack have that power. So let's go ahead and show you the next one. So here, this one would let you move two of your soldiers immediately onto two banners.
Yeah, I think those are called standards.
Yeah, that's standards.
Yeah, exactly. So the pink background spaces.
Yes. So that's the same as the previous one. You can immediately move two of your legionnaires onto standards. Next one, same thing. You can move them onto shields this time, though. So that's that. This one, you can move two soldiers immediately onto two daggers. This one's especially useful because daggers, as we demonstrated before, there are only one dagger. There's only one dagger token in the whole bag. And obviously, if you get wilds, that's another issue. But this immediately lets you fulfill two other daggers, which are pretty rare overall. Okay. Next one, the chariots. Two legionnaires immediately onto chariots. Next one's onto catapults, two soldiers. Now here, this one's a special one. As you can see, it's only one soldier, so that's different. But here, it's anything. So it's essentially as if once you complete this objective, you remove the soldiers, and then the immediate power that would come into effect is one of those soldiers that you just took off, you could stick them on any other symbol that you wanted to. You could stick it on a dagger, you could stick it on double swords, you could stick it on catapults, anything. So this one is obviously a lot more versatile, but it's only one soldier instead.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. And lastly, the one that's really awesome, the sheep. No, it's not that. The sheep is not what's special about this particular card. It's the fact that you can move two soldiers immediately to anything you want. So obviously it's a rather difficult card to complete, 6 spaces, one of those being a standard. Mm-hmm. So you can move two soldiers immediately to something else. So you have to work hard for it, but you can fulfill a dagger or any other hard symbol that you've been trying to work on and it hasn't been drawn by a town crier.
Right.
So those were all those.
Yeah, so those are all the examples where you just move legions that you just use to complete the objective onto something else.
Okay. Now Michelle's going to go on to these ones over here.
Okay, so all the examples in this stack are going to have equals signs. So this, you can see, I think the hourglass at the top represents that this is an ongoing effect. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have, once you complete this objective and you put it in your controlled objective area, you're going to have this ability for the rest of the game. So in this one, you can see that double swords are equal to shields. That means when the town crier draws either of this type of token, you can count it as the kind it is or the other kind that's here on the card. So to make that more clear, if the town crier says double swords, then you can count that as double swords and put a legionnaire on a double sword space, or you can count it as a shield and put a legionnaire on a shield space. And it goes the other direction too. So if the town crier says shield, you can put a legionnaire on a shield space, or you can put it on a double sword space. Yeah. So it basically makes those two symbols interchangeable for you, the person who completed that objective.
And the way you, and the way you know that is obviously if it's in your controlled objective area. Mm-hmm. So obviously if it's in your working area, that doesn't count. But once it's into your controlled area, that's when that special ability comes into play. Mm-hmm. And you can have multiples of this in your controlled area, but we're going to explain that in just a second. Let's say, for example, the next one.
So this one's the same type of idea, but you see shields equals chariots. Mm-hmm. So when the town crier, if you've completed this objective and have it in your controlled area, when the town crier says shield, you can count it as a shield or you can count it as a chariot. So you can put a legionnaire in either of those spaces and go in the opposite direction. If the town crier says chariot, then you can put a legionnaire either on a shield or on a chariot.
Sorry about the disorganization there, but yeah. So this also means, let's say you had both of these in your controlled area. If the town crier says shield, then you can choose that to be a shield, or it could be a chariot, or, using this card, it could be double swords. However, if the town crier says double swords, that can only be double swords or a shield. It cannot be a chariot. It doesn't go boom, boom, boom. So that doesn't work.
Right. So in this case, if shield was called, you could either focus on this card and say, oh, it might be a shield or it might be a chariot. Or you could focus on this card and say, well, that shield might be a shield or it might be a double sword. But yeah, the chariot doesn't transfer and connect with the double sword. That's basically, you could think of that as too complicated.
Yeah. So obviously, like, you might think that's equal, but for the purposes of this game, that rule does not work. This isn't math, for example. So in this particular instance, yeah, so that equals that equals that, and yeah, these two cards are independent of each other. All right, next card.
Okay, so then we're just going to see the same type of idea on each of these cards. So this one, chariots equals catapults.
So, and obviously the reverse as well.
This one, standards equals daggers, and daggers equals standards. And this one, catapults equals standards, and standards equal catapults.
So that's how that applies. All right.
So basically those cards give you flexibility in what spaces you can cover with your legionnaires. And the more of them you have, the more you can say, well, the town crier pulled this token, but look, I can turn it into this type of space. So that can be pretty useful for completing your objectives in the future.
And these abilities are can be used throughout the entire game as long as this is in your controlled area. Okay, so I'll stick that aside. All right, next section. All right, so these are the awesome positive benefit cards from my perspective, anyway. So the first one here, if you complete this objective, as you can tell, it's a relatively hard objective because it has 2 daggers, which I said are really rare, and 3 standards, which are also pretty rare overall. So if you complete this difficult objective, the power that this grants you is any objective that you are also working on turning into a controlled objective, you can immediately make that a completed objective, a controlled objective. So if you complete this objective, one of the other 2 objectives that you have in your area, you can immediately complete that one as well at the same time.
So it basically gives you sort of 2 for the price of 1.
Right. So like if you have another really difficult objective card next to this difficult objective card and you finish it, then you can complete both difficult objectives at the same time, essentially. That's the first one. Okay. This one here, if you complete this objective and you get all 4 legionnaires for it, this positive benefit is essentially when you normally would draw up one of the objective cards to replace this one that you just finished, you actually can draw 2 instead. So you wouldn't just have 3 objective cards in front of you, you would have 4 working objective cards.
Yeah, so when looking up here where you choose objectives from, you would get to choose 2 instead of just 1.
And I know it's kind of confusing because you look here and it just has a picture of an objective card, but basically think of that as in addition to the one that you're already going to be drawing for completing this objective.
And that's an immediate effect, so it just happens when you complete this objective.
Yeah, it doesn't continue on indefinitely. That would be weird. Okay, and lastly, not lastly, but here, another one of the positive benefit cards. If you finish this senator, as you can see here, you would take the legionnaires off of his spaces, and all of the remaining legionnaires that you currently have on your area, not legionnaires, but the legionnaires that you have on your 2 worked on objectives. So let's say, for example, you had this had 1 legionnaire, 2 legionnaires, and this one over here Add 1 legionnaire, 2 legionnaires. So if you completed that objective, he would go into your controlled area, and then his special ability, basically, on all your remaining objectives that you're working on, you can rearrange the legionnaires in any way that you want. So, for example, this just needs 2 more legionnaires to be completed. I could grab the 2 legionnaires from this one over here and place them here. I'm getting a little lazy, obviously. They're not standing up anymore. But
they were tired when they arrived.
Yeah, they're all over the place. Anyway, so you can use his special ability to finish another objective card. So in one quick stroke, you can complete 2 objectives at the same time, which can be beneficial in terms of speeding up the end of the game, and also giving you special benefits. So, for example, if I finish this, then this actually would be a really interesting combo of special powers. But in this particular instance, he would be completed. He would go to my completed area. Then I would use his special ability and do this. And so basically, I would draw 3 objectives.
Yeah, 3 new objectives to work on.
Because of this special ability.
Right, because you'd be getting a new one to replace each of the 2 that you just completed, and then you'd be getting an extra one because of that special ability that lets you take an extra new objective.
So, for example, he would go to controlled. I would pick one from there and replace that. This one would be finished, so that would also go to controlled. I would grab another one to replace that one. And as this special power dictates, I would get a 3rd extra one. So I would draw 3 extra, which would be kind of crazy and pretty complicated all at once. But yeah, the positive benefit cards, they can help you out a lot to get a lot of things done at the same time.
Right. So, and in that example, you'd end up with 4 objectives because you have replaced the 2 you completed and gotten an extra one, and you'd still be working on one.
So yeah, 4 total working on objectives. All right, let's get these guys out of the way. They're just way too powerful, obviously. And lastly, these guys. Actually, let's switch the order of these 2. There we go. All right. Next one. Why don't you go ahead, Michelle?
Okay, so for this one, you basically just get to add a new legionnaire to your pool once you complete this objective. So instead of having 7 like you originally start out with, you now will have 8 guys in your pool to place on your objectives.
So as you can see here, this fancy line, obviously it gives you enough legionnaires to play a 6-player game, but when you get this card, you can grab one of the legionnaires off of this line and add him to your pool. So now you have 8. Or
this one, same basic idea, but you get to add 2 legionnaires to your pool once you complete this objective.
1, 2, 1, 2. So those are all the really awesome positive benefit cards.
Yeah, so those special abilities are the ways that you can end up with more than just 7 legionnaires in your pool.
Depending on how many of those cards you draw, obviously, and complete. All right, let's get to the negative cards that hurt other people. Not very badly, but still.
So you can see the red background on these special abilities, so they look ominous. So for this one, if you complete this objective, then each of your opponents has to remove 1 legionnaire from a space, so from one of their worked on objectives. Don't get confused and think that they actually lose a legionnaire from their pool. This just means they have to take it off of a space that it's on and put it back in their pool.
So for example, if Michelle's area had this card to the left, and she had 2 legionnaires on there, she would choose which one of those legionnaires she would remove. If she had multiple objectives, then she could pick any of the objectives and pick one person to remove.
Yeah, so the person who's losing the legionnaire gets to choose which space they want to take it off of, and then they just put it back in their pool.
Right. So, for example, I would complete this objective and say, ha ha ha, Michelle, you have to remove one of your legionnaires. This is Michelle's card. She would pick 1. It doesn't matter, but yeah.
And if there were more players, then each of them would have to take off one of their legionnaires. Only the player who completed this objective doesn't lose a legionnaire.
Right. So that's that. Let's go to the next one. Just a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, this one's very similar. Each of your opponents would have to remove 2 legionnaires and put them back in their pool. And something to note about this is that they can come from the same objective or from multiple objectives. So your opponents just each choose any 2 legionnaires that they have in play and put those 2 back in their pool.
Yeah, so for example, if Michelle over here had 2 there, and let's say she had this one too, and she had 1 here, she gets to choose. So she can take 1 off of each, her choice. She could take the 2 off of this one. Yeah, doesn't matter. It's basically her choice. So that is that. Oopsie daisy. 1 second.
And as with the previous example, each of your opponents has to remove 2 legionnaires.
So if you're playing a 6-player game, all the other 5 players have to do it. And another one.
So with this one, each of your opponents has to remove the legionnaires from 1 entire objective.
So obviously, if you're playing this against your opponents, then your opponents obviously are going to try and choose an objective where they don't have that many legionnaires on top of, obviously.
Right.
Like if they have one card that has 4 legionnaires and another card that just has 1 legionnaire, obviously they're going to go for that one because that 4 one is going to be a lot harder to recoup their losses. So basically it just it either can completely undo the work that they've been working hard on to accomplish a really hard objective, or they can just choose to pick one that only has 1.
Right.
So that is that. And it has a lion on it, so it's scary. And then the next one.
Here's another evil-looking senator.
He looks like a Sith Lord. Anyway.
So with this one, each of your opponents has to actually lose a completed objective. Yeah, so an objective that's already in their controlled area, they have to take it and, I guess, put it in the discard pile.
Yeah, so they lose it.
Yeah, they don't have that objective anymore.
Yeah, so don't follow, if you're playing this with children, don't let them rip the card. That is not what you're supposed to do. Basically, so if you have all of your opponents, if they have, not you obviously as the person doing this evil act, but let's just say we were looking at your opponent's area. Your opponent, if they only had 1 objective, obviously they can't choose anything else. They have to get rid of that 1 objective they've completed. But let's just say they had 2, for example, in their completed area. They would get to choose which objective they would remove from the game. They would take it and put it into the discard pile. And they would no longer benefit from that special power or whatever. But obviously, if they have multiple objectives, they're going to choose the thing that hurts them the least.
Right.
So that's that. And lastly, this card, these are getting into the pile over here as well. But basically, this senator, he has a question mark. We've mentioned this before. So just briefly, though. He is worth as many victory points as you have negative red cards. So if you had in your tableau of completed objectives...
And this is at the end of the game.
At the end of the game. This has no immediate effect. This only changes stuff, point totals at the end of the game. If in your completed area you had all 4 of these cards, you have a nice little evil troop going on. I'm not sure what the sheep has to do with it. But, anyway, if you had all of these... He doesn't count, obviously, because he doesn't have a red background on his special power. But as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you had 4 of these, each of those is worth 5 points. So 5 times 4 is 20. This question mark would become a 20 at the end of the game. Or if you just had 1, it would just be 5.
Right.
So those are all the evil cards in the game.
So now we're going to talk about cards that are similar to the one we just went over.
That have question marks in the bottom right corner.
So these basically give you a way of getting more points at the end of the game.
So
let's get that stack.
Right here? Okay. Last stack of the game.
So this one, as you can see, is a green territory. And the special ability says you get 2 points for each green territory that you have at the end of the game.
And obviously this is a green territory. That's how you can identify green territories, by the banner on the bottom, as well as the color of the province in the middle of the picture. And as you can see here, it's a question mark. So the maximum that you could possibly get, if you don't do any special finagling of getting an objective that completes another objective stuff, this would give you a maximum of 7. because if you can have a maximum of 7 objectives unless you do something special.
Mm-hmm.
If you had all green territories, that would be 7 times 2, which would be 14. So that's the maximum amount of points you could get from this, barring any other special funny things that you do.
Yeah, if you somehow got an extra objective at the end or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So that is that. Next one.
Okay, so this one is the same concept. You can see that this province is pink, and it says in the
or purple. I'm not sure if that's pink or purple.
Yeah. So then the special ability of this card is that you get 4 victory points for every one of that color. So I think it's pink. But for each of the pink provinces that you have at the end of the game, you'll get 4 victory points.
And one fact you might want to know, green is actually the most plentiful in this whole game. So there's a decent chance you'll get a lot of greens coming out. But like I said, the maximum that you'll probably get at most is 14 points from this.
Mm-hmm.
Purple or pink is the next most plentiful in the deck. Obviously you'll get more points the more purple or pink that you have with this card. So that's special, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so next we come to the last province card.
So this is, I think, orange.
Mm-hmm.
So this one gives you 6 victory points for each orange province that you have at the end of the game.
So obviously a lot more points, but the orange territories, orange provinces, are a lot less plentiful in the deck. I believe there's probably like 7 or 8 of them in the entire deck. So if you see a lot of orange coming out into this area that you can pick from, then you might want to go for this card. But aside from that, it's probably not a really wise choice because it is 6 points, but it has to be worthwhile. Obviously, this card counts as 1 orange province. Mm-hmm. So if you had 3 orange provinces, which is hard to accomplish, but if you got 3, then it would be 6 times 3, which would be 18 points, which in comparison with the green card, obviously is a lot more points than that.
Right.
For a lot fewer cards.
Mm-hmm.
So that is that. Right. Those are all the special province bonus point territory objectives.
Now, if you complete this objective and get this senator, he's going to give you 2 victory points for each senator that you have at the end of the game. And that would include him, of course, because he's a senator.
Mm-hmm. Next one.
Okay, so this one's going to give you victory points for having a double sword space on a completed objective. So for every double sword space that you have on a completed objective at the end of the game, you're going to get a victory point.
So for example, if this was your completed objective area at the end of the game, you would look and see how many double swords do I have here in this particular area, completed area. We use completed and controlled kind of interchangeably.
Right.
Just to be clear.
I think the technical term is controlled.
Mm-hmm. But as you can see, we only have 1, 2 double swords. Each one of those double swords is worth 1 victory point. And so this could be worth a maximum of 6. So if we had 6 double swords, that would be worth 6 victory points. And if we had 8 double swords, that would still only be worth 6.
Right. And then this has a double sword symbol on it, so that would count toward the total.
Obviously.
You'd get a point for that.
Because obviously you have to finish this. So that's a good catch right there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This one's going to give you a victory point for each shield that you have on a completed objective at the end of the game. So same idea.
Mm-hmm. Up to a maximum of 8. So if you have 10 shields, only 8 count.
Mm-hmm.
And each one is worth 1.
Okay, then this one's the same type of thing. It's for chariots, but in this case you get 2 points for each chariot that you have on a completed objective, and the max you can get is 10.
So obviously that could only happen with 5 chariots because 5 times 2 would be 10.
Okay, and then so this one, same type of thing, but standards are worth 3 victory points.
Mm-hmm. Maximum of 15. So obviously same thing, 5 times 3 is 15, so only 5 standards would count.
Okay, so then we can finish pretty quickly with these symbols. So for catapults, you get 3 points for each catapult and 12 points maximum.
Mm-hmm.
For this one, it's the same, but it's for daggers, and you get 4 points each, 20 maximum.
Right, so same as 5. So 5 daggers, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, so those are all the not all the objective cards, but all the types of special effects or special abilities that you will find on the objective cards.
All right, so we'll see you guys in the next video. If you enjoyed the content of this video, please give us a like or subscribe to our channel if you want to get regular updates from us. please subscribe on YouTube at the Board Game Tutors. Or if you would like to check us out on BoardGameGeek.com, our username is the Board Game Tutors, one word. And check out all of our content there.
All right, thanks so much for watching. Let us know if you have any questions or comments or clarifications, and we'll see you in the next video.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye.